Hello everyone and welcome back to another installment of our webinar series Straight from the Horse's Mouth. The circular economy is often seen as a potential solution to reduce waste and reduce our carbon footprint. Systems that keep materials in circulation though can have a higher carbon footprint than conventional linear systems. The challenge for policymakers is to achieve both outcomes, a low carbon circular economy. Minimising construction waste is an activity that ticks both boxes. Here's a sneak preview.
Part of the brief for Barbara and the team at ThinkStep was to how can we really explain clearly that interconnectedness between reducing waste and reducing carbon in the sector.
What is the relationship between the materials and how much they contribute to the carbon footprint? And you can see there is a lot of construction waste, and concrete doesn't contribute that much to the global warming potential. The construction waste is a small share of that embodied carbon, but it is one that is entirely avoidable. And that is what we want to look at. And we can take action in the manufacturing stage. So we reduce manufacturing waste to landfill by closing those inner loops within the business. But we can then also, in the sales aspect, we can help with eliminating product waste by being very specific in what is ordered and order the right amounts and having the right contracts to initiate and encourage low carbon products. So that sales and ordering process does play an important role.
Our latest report looks at low carbon circular construction. James Griffin from New Zealand Sustainable Business Network joined thinkstep-anz CEO Barbara Nebel to launch the report. With that, let's get started.
Let's get going. A very warm welcome back to our webinar series, Straight from the Horse's Mouth, Insights from Experts in 30 Minutes. I'm Barbara, and I'm not your host today. We have James Griffin from the Sustainable Business Network, who will be hosting today's webinar. We will set the scene on our topic today, the circular economy and construction within the building industry, and how do climate change and waste reduction actually go hand in hand.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for that introduction, Barbara. So, ko James Griffin, toko ingoa. And I lead the work to accelerate a business-led circular economy at the Sustainable Business Network, and really delighted that you could join us for this session on circular economy and construction. But before we start, I will kick off with a karakia. Tūtā mai I runga, tūtā mai I raro, tūtā mai I waho, tūtā mai I roto, kia tu ai te mori tu, te mori ora ki te katoa. Umie, uie, tai kia. So just as a bit of background for those who aren't familiar with the Sustainable Business Network, we are New Zealand's largest and longest standing sustainability business organisation, with hundreds of organisations within the network across the country, including the likes of the wonderful thinkstep-anz, of course. And we are collectively working to change systems to create the environment for a low carbon, circular and regenerative economy. We're upskilling businesses and profiling and connecting the wonderful work that our members are doing. So what we're going to be doing over the next half an hour is taking a deep dive into the interconnectedness between waste reduction and carbon reduction within the construction sector. Barbara is going to be leading that deep dive, so really looking forward to that. There will be some time for questions at the end. And I really wanted to just talk a bit about the background to this work is that we collectively ran a masterclass building out waste and carbon last month with Auckland Council, ThinkStep and Unitec. And part of the brief for Barbara and the team at ThinkStep was to how can we really explain clearly that interconnectedness between reducing waste and reducing carbon in the sector. Because there's some evidence that waste reduction and carbon reduction is almost being treated in some respects in two different work streams. And of course, what we're looking to get is this coordinated and mutually inclusive way of working with regards to a true circular economy in those two aspects. And of course, Barbara and the team at ThinkStep are very robust and knowledgeable and serious about this topic, and said, well, actually, let's create a white paper on the topic. And so that's what they've done. And it's my pleasure to be introducing Barbara to actually take you through the results of that work. So over to you, Barbara.
Well, welcome again. Thank you for the introduction, James. I was just saying it was super exciting to be part of the masterclass, even though it had to be remotely for me because planes just didn't want to fly the way we needed them that day. That's why we're having that later extension to the masterclass today. I'll talk a little bit about a life cycle approach, and I will really talk closely about that interconnection between reducing resource use and reducing carbon. Most of you, quite a few of you out there do know us, but I'll give you a little bit of a description because we do quite a few different things. And I won't go through all the little details, but what we really do, I always say, is that bit in the middle, is how does circular economy and carbon and LCA and communication, how do all those things feed together? So instead of focusing on all those different aspects of sustainability, which we can do, what we really are about is to identify where are the linkages. And that is what we wanted to do in that white paper. So David will put the link to the white paper, which has been put up on our website today, into the chat. And we'll circulate it afterwards as well so that you can all read it. I'll introduce some key terms first. So there is LCA, life cycle assessment, which is all about taking a full life cycle approach to avoid trade-offs between those different steps of the life cycle and also between different environmental impacts. There's a standardized methodology and it's been around for now 50 years. That's all I'm going to say today about LCA. Embodied carbon, that's another key term that always comes up. And embodied carbon includes three main things. That is the upfront carbon. When we create a material, we need to get the resources from somewhere, we need to process it. That happens all upfront of building the building. That's why it's upfront. We need to do that before we build the building. Then we have the building and we use the building. We have to replace some of the materials. We have to do repairs. So we've got embodied carbon in the use phase. And then we have end of life embodied carbon, should that material actually end up in landfill. So embodied carbon really is those three stages. Again, the life cycle. And now another term is circular economy. And for us, there is a real big difference between circularity, which really is just decoupling from virgin materials and waste production, but also taking into account economic, environmental, and social benefits. In this study, we are actually looking at circularity, but I did want to say it's really important to keep in mind that circular economy has a whole range of different facets to it as well, which is beyond the scope of what we're doing today. Today, it's about the construction life cycle. It's about resources, manufacturing, construction, using, and end of life. And when it comes to circular economy, we want this to be really close loop and want to address those loops of reusing materials, keeping them within that circle, minimizing that part which is the end of life. And because we have materials leaving the system, and that is construction waste and it is demolition waste. Can't do it all, so we're focusing on construction waste today. We have to do bit by bit. So how does construction waste to landfill and construction actually relate to carbon? That is that sweet spot that we want to find. What we first of all have looked at is what is the total global warming potential of the materials in the building consents for 2021 in New Zealand, and how much of that is the manufacturing and how much of that is disposal. So a lot of it is in manufacturing and not so much in the disposal, but that chunk still is a chunk that we can work with and where we can reduce emissions. We can obviously also reduce emissions and how we make the materials in the first place. That's not the focus of this paper right now. Here we want to see what is the relationship between the materials and how much they contribute to the carbon footprint. And you can see there is a lot of construction waste, and concrete doesn't contribute that much to the global warming potential. It is slightly different with other materials. So you can see plasterboard, weight-wise, not that much, but more in the carbon side. And we had to rely here on available data. That's why there seems to be a bit of an anomaly with steel, that it has proportionally more carbon than the construction. So there needs to be a little bit more work to be done, but it's not necessarily we have a lot of this material and therefore a lot of carbon. It's not a necessarily linear relationship. It is, looking at it, the construction waste is a small share of that embodied carbon, but it is one that is entirely avoidable. And that is what we want to look at. We do have a case study that we already have published. That case study was done with Winston Boards. And what we have done is we've looked here at the manufacturing and construction aspects. So we've made it a linear, at the moment, life cycle from the raw materials right through to end of life, and looked at where can we take action. And we can take action in the manufacturing stage. So we reduce manufacturing waste to landfill by closing those inner loops within the business. But we can then also, in the sales aspect, we can help with eliminating product waste by being very specific in what is ordered and order the right amounts and having the right contracts to initiate and encourage low carbon products. So that sales and ordering process does play an important role. Transport plays an important role. If we order, say, 8% less materials, we have 8% less transport. And then again, we have another lever when we construct, make that better, and we have less construction waste. So there are a number of levers along that life cycle where we really can take action to reduce waste, construction waste going to landfill, and therefore also carbon. And what we said before is reducing that actually at the moment really plays to circularity, to reducing the amount of resources, but there is a clear overlap with also reducing carbon. Reducing carbon does require a lot of other work as well. Circular economy also requires other work, but there is a very close correlation and an overlap. And that is that sweet spot that we need to find. And what we have highlighted in our paper on what are the materials that we can also really focus on to be in that sweet spot of, if we reduce waste of those particular materials more, then we have a great impact on a lower carbon economy. How does that fit into the wider context of buildings? And is that embodied carbon generally really relevant? So we have looked at the total built environment and how much the embodied carbon is here. And this here is a snapshot out of New Zealand's of the New Zealand emission reduction plan, which has been published by the Climate Commission. And when I flicked through that report, 240 odd pages, I think it was, I was like, oh, they use a very similar graphic to ours, just that the colors didn't remind me. And so I flicked it to a colleague and said, yeah, that is because it's our graph. So that was great to see that this is actually taken up by government in the emission reduction plan. And you can see here that the embodied emissions actually do contribute significantly to all the building related emissions. And if we can reduce the impact of those embodied emissions, we will help to bring the overall emissions down. And yeah, we have seen some of those levers before. So it's in the how we produce them, how we order them, how we transport them, and how we use those materials on site. Now, I have talked about the life cycle approach, and I really like this quote from Jim Farber, who is often called the grandfather of LCA. He's the one who coined that term. And he says LCA information is essential, is not sufficient though. And I really like that because as we have seen, it's not just about the LCA. We do need to look at what are the other levers, what are other elements that have to come in. But it is important to really consider that full life cycle of the materials. That is why when we think about circular economy, we think about those different aspects, which are the environment, social aspects, which we haven't touched on today at all. It's about healthy materials. It's about making it economically viable. And then it is about regenerative system and material reutilization as well. So those are the different aspects. And that is all good, but we do need to talk about it and we need to measure it and have the right systems. And that is where responsible procurement comes in. And then was the sales and ordering process, but it's also the economics. We use the material circularity indicator from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We do use LCA and EPDs to communicate, or even cradle to cradle. And all of that together really helps to achieve what we need to. So it's not a single aspect that we can use to identify opportunities for waste reduction and or carbon reduction, and in ideal case, both. That was me giving a real quick run through the white paper, and I can see there are quite a few comments in the chat and questions. So I'll hand it back over to James to facilitate a bit of a Q&A session. And between us, I'm sure we can answer at least some of the questions.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for taking us through at speed the findings within the white paper. And of course, there's the link where you can actually download the full report in the chat. So yeah, questions are coming through, which is excellent. I'll start off with a clarification question. Barbara, can you clarify fugitive emissions in construction, please?
Yes, so the fugitive emissions are the emissions that are not directly from a process, but they are the ones that we can't capture really. So they are, if for example, materials go to landfill and would decompose if it is natural material. So those are fugitive emissions that would be emitted.
Thank you. And then, another clarification question, really, around did you make the distinction in the waste estimated between what is the amount coming from construction waste and from demolition waste, demolition of an existing building prior to the construction?
Yes, in our study, we have just focused on the construction waste and not on the demolition of existing buildings. That would be very interesting to do too, but within the scope that we had available to us, we really could only focus on the construction waste. And that is also where we have the levers that we can use right now when we build new buildings. But absolutely right, we do need to look and focus on demolition waste as well. That is for another time though.
What is the reason construction waste only accounts for such a small amount in terms of GWP? What makes up the majority?
So the reason construction waste only accounts for a relatively small amount in terms of global warming emissions is that a lot of the materials are relatively inert. So if you think about concrete and steel, or concrete and aggregates, for example, or masonry and those sorts of materials, they will sit in a landfill and not do much. As steel would be recycled. So timber would in a landfill degrade, but not a lot of it does actually degrade in a landfill. So that's why there isn't a very, very strong correlation between overall carbon emissions and construction waste. Having said that, there are lots of other really good reasons to reduce construction waste.
Well, absolutely. In terms of the embodied carbon and avoided carbon via things such as reuse and reduction. Did you identify the materials and the amount that could be reused in a circular economy for building or other application?
We have not looked at that in this particular study, but I think, James, you did a study on a circular office at some point. And did you look at more of the material reuse in that context?
Yeah, we created a circular economy model office initiative, and it's really a system to take a circular lens across commercial builds and particularly fit outs. And it didn't actually include any carbon calculations, but it's a methodology for maximizing the reuse of existing materials, and that's available on sustainable.org.nz.
What I can say is that we have all the desks that we have in this office here and the carpet in our Wellington office, they're all reused materials. So we're also doing our part in reusing where we can.
Someone has noticed there was no mention of design as a point of reduction in your graphics.
That's a really good point. Thanks.
Well done, Dave Watson, for pointing that out.
Yeah, that is an absolutely very critical point. I think the only excuse I can say that it wasn't in here, that is we did the case study with a materials manufacturer, but you're absolutely right. We need to design it out in the first place. I think that comes into that sales and ordering process if we order the right amount, but it's only half of it really. We can design a building better and use less materials in the first place. Yeah, good point. Thanks, Dave.
Do the graphs presented include emissions derived from fit outs within commercial buildings, or is it only for construction of buildings?
No, we only did the construction of the buildings.
And there's a question about what role do you think carbon credits can play in low carbon circular economy?
I would think, I always look at carbon credits as a transition at the moment, because we do need to reduce. It's just, there is no way around it. We need to reduce carbon emissions. Carbon credits come in where we can't do it fast enough. So in the meantime, it's a good idea to use carbon credits. And also we won't be able to reduce it all. So there are unavoidable emissions, and those will then have to be offset if we are working towards a net zero carbon future. So carbon credits do play an important role, but they're always secondary after reduction.
And I think, I mean, building on that point to some degree, there is the avoided emissions and and avoided materials being used. So the avoided embodied carbon. Sometimes businesses find it difficult to capture that information and report on it as easily as the waste they do create being diverted from landfill. Any thoughts on that, Barbara?
Yeah, I find that concept also very difficult to quantify, because I mean, what we really do need, what we calculate and work out is what is the actual carbon related to a certain activity or to a certain product. And when I could say I have not bought 5 new cars last year, therefore I have avoided emissions. It's really, I think we do need to focus on what is it that we actually do emit, because the avoidance is a very difficult concept, I think, to use.
Probably why it hasn't been that developed up to now. Well, very conscious of the time and keeping within the half an hour limit, and we could have gone on for a lot longer, of course. So I just want to say thank you again, Barbara, for you and the team for putting this work together to highlight this symbiotic relationship between the circular economy and carbon. Of course, there's multiple complexities within that. And I just want to share just a thought before we start to close, in that building on from the construction masterclass that we had in October, we're really looking to bring together people who have an aspiration to be really transformative within the sector. And so we're talking about going way beyond just having better recycling systems. And also, if you have agency within your organization to take transformative action, we would love to connect with you and get you part of an emerging circular construction collective that we are establishing following on from the masterclass. So great if you could give me a call or an email if you're interested. So I'll now close the webinar.
Thank you so much again, James. As a closing, I'll just share here the link of our white paper that has just come online, and we'll circulate the link to you. And yeah, thanks for taking us through all of that today, James.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'll just have a closing character. Unia kiti ulu tapunui. Kia watia, kia mama te nākau. Te tinana ti warawa, kiti ara tangata. Koi rā e rongo, whakarihia, ake ki ronga, kia tina, tine, huie taikia.
Thank you very much, James.